Hello, Airs Bears, and good morning. I know we're not at school today, but I've been missing you, and I hope everyone is having a good day with their families. Um, it's a little unusual for us to all be at home instead of together at school, and I started thinking about if I were you, what would I be missing most from my classroom? And I remembered that back when I was in elementary school, my favorite time was reading time and story time. And I realized I would really miss it if I weren't in school. And I don't want you to miss it. So I've decided that while we're all not able to be together, I would read you a book anyway so we could still have a shared experience together. And in the comments down below, you could type what you thought was interesting about the story, or a new word you heard, or an inference that you made, or a prediction that you have for the next chapter. Got to get those educational pieces in too, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a chapter book, and it is a book that some of you may have read or seen a movie of, or even there's some really cool radio show performances of it. There aren't a lot of pictures, so it's just going to be a chance to listen and enjoy some time. So I hope that you'll maybe pause the video right now, get yourself a little something to drink, some water, or I've got my coffee, a nice beverage, get cozy and ready to listen to a story. And what I'm going to read today, and it's going to look backwards to you because it's a camera, I'm going to read C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, this book was published first, but it's actually not the first book in the series chronologically. The whole series is called The Chronicles of Narnia. And in chronological order, I believe this is book 3. But this is the book I remember my teacher reading me. And I just loved it so much. And I read it to my daughter when she was younger. So now I want to read it to all of you. So today we're going to have Chapter 1 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Chapter 1. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. See that piece of furniture right here? That's a wardrobe. It's a place for people to store clothes if they don't have a closet. A lot of older homes, and this was written in 1950, rooms did not have closets. They had these pieces of furniture instead. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They're talking about World War II. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. So they lived really far away. I just realized I need to turn my phone off so no one calls me. There we go. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house, the housekeeper, called Mrs. Macready, and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they did not come into the story very much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him. And Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet, and no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" asked Susan. And anyway, it's time you were in bed. Stop trying to talk like Mother, said Edmund. And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself. Hadn't we all better go to bed? Said Lucy. There's sure to be a fight if we're heard talking in here. No, there won't, said Peter. I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between. A 10-minute walk in a house? I think this must be a very large house. What's that noise? Said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. It's only a bird, silly, said Edmund. It's an owl, said Peter. This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There'll be hawks. Badgers? Said Lucy. Snakes, said Edmund. Foxes, said Susan. But when next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. Of course it would be raining, said Edmund. They had just finished breakfast with the professor, and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction, and 2 windows looking out in another. Do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. A wireless is a radio. They didn't have TV. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore the house. Everyone agreed to this, and that was how all of the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected that they would. But soon they came into a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor. And after that was a room all hung with green curtains, and there was a harp in the corner. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then kind of a little upstairs hallway and a door that led out onto a balcony. And then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined up with books. Most of them were very old books, and some were bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe. It was the kind of sort of wardrobe that has a looking glass in the door. That's a mirror. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. Does anyone know what a blue bottle is? It's an insect. Nothing there, said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. See, she stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in between the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it is very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went in further and found that there was a second row of coats hanging out behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as to not bump into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel the back of the wardrobe. This must be simply an enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs? She thought, stooping down to feel it with her hands, but instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very odd, she said. She went on a step or 2 further. What do you think she's feeling? I know, but I'm not going to tell you. The next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and kind of prickly. Why, it's just like branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a very long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her, and a moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood, a forest. It was night time, and there was snow under her feet, and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew it's a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. Well, I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow, and through the woods towards the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found that it was a lamp post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp in the middle of the woods, and wondering what to do next, she heard the pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamp post. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat. The hair on them was glossy and black. And instead of feet, he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first, because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep his tail from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen scarf around his neck, and his skin was a little reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella, and in the other hand he carried several brown paper packages. What with the packages and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a startle of surprise that he dropped all of his packages. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. And that's the end of chapter 1. Check tomorrow for a video, chapter 2, What Lucy Found. I hope you guys have a great afternoon, and I'll see you soon. Bye.